Are you guys looking for a high-level monster to introduce to your gaming group this October, this Halloween, or really anytime? John and I have created one for you. We're going to jump right into it. Let's get started.
Welcome to Dungeon Brew.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Dungeon Brew. So, you probably haven't seen the two of us together in quite some time. We've been doing a lot of solo videos, but we decided that we wanted to talk about the next monster that we said that we were going to build. This was one that you all voted for on the Patreon, which of course, if you're wanting a copy of this, the PDF, it is free on the Patreon. You just need to hop over there and download it. There's really nothing stopping you, honestly. So the monster in question is the Nithhoggr. Nithhoggr? How is it pronounced, Joshua? This is your monster, your creation.
As with most things within my world, even in the course of like our games, we pronounce it 3 different ways. So we'll just say it differs based on the region of the world you're in.
Sure. Okay. Cool. So anyway, this is a higher CR monster than the other 2 that we built in November. The first one, or in October, the first one we built was the Bone Fairy, and if I remember right, that was around a CR 10. And then we did the Cimmerghoul, and that was a CR 3. So this is the third monster that we're doing. It's a little bit more powerful, a little bit more dangerous for the parties that are going to encounter it. But before we get into the specifics about like all of the things that it can do in combat, Josh, do you want to talk about the lore a little bit? Like, give us an idea of where this monster is going to fit into a game session. Like, what is the history behind it? What's going on with it?
Yeah, I will try not to spend like the next hour talking about this, but the Nidhoggr is a very unique monster that is primarily reserved for the Netherworld. So if you're running like a Hell campaign or an Underworld campaign, it's a really great place to introduce this. They're almost like demonic humanoid dragons that have a very long history in regards to like their connection to the world and how they were created. And I think their creation story is my favorite. In ANR, in my world, there used to be these primordial energies that kind of ruled over the expanse of this place before Cowan the Deathless came along and imprisoned them within the ash tree, these old energies. And the Nithhoggr are said to have been birthed by the weeping sap that came out of the ash tree, formulating these creatures that then started to eat on the roots and essentially ingest that magic that made themselves these mixture between these draconic types of creatures as well as these shade-like creatures that were reminiscent of what the old Dark's powers were.
Right, and so, and I think that this is interesting because as far as the Nithhoggr is concerned, those familiar with Norse mythology might look at this and go, well, that's the dragon that eats at the roots of the world tree. But not only are you taking this, based off of Slavic mythology in that version, but you also have created a twist on it to fit within your specific world. So it really probably doesn't match up with what people have in their heads regarding what they think this creature is going to be. So this is a large creature, right? So it's going to be bigger than normal humanoids that aren't going to encounter it. But when it comes up, this is a significant threat to those people. And like you said, it's mostly going to be occurring in the underworld, in the Hells type region. Yeah,
absolutely. Seeing these probably in the known world at any level would be pretty rare. I think that'd be a very unique thing to see them bleeding over into like modern day civilization. So, I guess if you were to have, the Hells come into whatever existence you have, you could bring them up that way, but they're primarily reserved for the Hells.
All right. So is there anything else that you want to talk about in regard to lore before we get into what this monster is really all about?
Well, I think in regards to both Slavic and Norse mythology, it was pretty well assumed that they always just fed on the roots, and that was kind of their breeding grounds. In my world of ANR, the ash tree has actually been injured, so to speak, and so the roots are no longer intact. And so this has caused the Nithhoggr to start swarming the skies and essentially moving across the netherworld, looking for other things to feed on. And they're primarily drawn to things that have that same magical energy as the Old Dark. So anyone that casts magic or anyone that has a magical essence, they're pretty much drawn to want to feed on those. And so they'll feed on the living that come into the netherworld that are carrying this. They're feeding on rotten flesh and demons and other creatures that are there. They're almost like these savage-like monsters that are just drawn towards any type of magical energies to feed on them.
So are they going to be more likely in a party of, fighters and barbarians and wizards and clerics to focus on those wizards and clerics rather than your fighters and barbarians?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that adds a special kind of hell to that entire situation for that party, I'm sure.
All right, yeah, let's dive into the stat block.
Yeah, when I was designing the stat block, it specifically was going off of the lore that you were feeding me in terms of what this monster should look like and what was going on with the way that it behaved, which it primarily appears in Hey Sheol, right, in that novel, where they're attacking two of the characters in there. And they have the ability to fly, obviously, which makes them a threat from a distance. I think that one of the big things is that because they're considered to be blind, the blind sense is really how they target. And then I would imagine to some degree they also have this kind of sense of magical energy. So the way that you might play them is going, they can't pinpoint anybody unless they're within 60 feet, but they're kind of drawn in the general direction of anybody who's using magical abilities. Would that be fair?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so the way that I would run this monster is that they have good defenses, high AC, a decent amount of HP. Really, when it comes down to the amount of damage that they do, it's actually a little bit lower for their CR. And what makes them dangerous is they're difficult to take down, and this is mostly due to the number of resistances and immunities that they have. They're resistant to acid, lightning, poison, thunder, and they're immune to cold and fire, which means that any of your blasters type casters who like to rely on those types of spells, or if you have, a flaming sword or something like that, that damage gets either mitigated or eliminated entirely. So players have to be very careful about this. Now, with that in mind, that's going to adjust how difficult the CR is on a monster like this. If you have a fire sorcerer and a cleric of tempest and things like that, they're going to have a harder time dealing with a monster like this than if you have a party that has like a warlock that's using Eldritch Blast continuously and is just doing force damage. So do keep that in mind when you're trying to balance encounters using these. I think that the big thing is that the way that they lead off is they have this charge ability. This is really similar to like the Minotaur's charge. They're going to start off from about 50, 60 feet away, charge in, try to headbutt somebody to knock them prone. The DC to not be knocked prone is pretty high, so anybody who has a low strength score is likely to fail this. And since they're targeting people or PCs like wizards and clerics, they're going to have a harder time against this than something like a barbarian or a fighter. So they're going to go in, do a ton of damage, and then most likely use something like their Wail ability, which also does psychic damage, and a Frighten. So they try and lock down enemies as quickly as possible, and then they'll just tear through them using a combination of their bites and their sickle attacks from that point forward. So they do quite a bit of melee damage when they're in close, but like I said, it is a little bit less. What they're doing, knocking them prone, gives them advantage on attacks. Having something like the Frightened condition gives them advantage, and both of those things make them more deadly in combat than their normal damage would suggest for a CR of this level.
So one of the things that I find most exciting about this creature is its Shade Rebirth ability, that once you actually drop the Nithhoggr down, its husk rips open and a shade emerges from that, and now you're battling with another entity. So it's almost like two monsters in one. What do the stats look like for that shade? Are we just pulling that out of the 5th edition monster manual? What's that look like?
Yeah, we're just looking at the shadow is what it's going to be, which I think is only a CR 1/2, which is low. But the thing about shadows is they have that life drain ability where they can reduce the maximum number of hit points that a character has. They're not likely to do a ton of damage using this ability, and they're not even likely to hit necessarily, but having another entity come back on the field means that when you kill a Nidhoggr, it doesn't immediately die necessarily. And since they have a tendency to target things like wizards, who are typically going to have a lower AC or a little bit easier to hit, something like a shadow can be very dangerous to them, especially if it actually succeeds in draining their maximum HP. So it's not a high CR. This is kind of one of those things where maybe it just takes another hit to get rid of that shadow, but it is also something that you simply can't ignore because of the other threats that it offers just by being on the field.
Yeah, the other thing that I think about often with these creatures specifically, and you mentioned the book that we have them in, is they oftentimes come in hordes. Like, it's not just one that you're typically fighting. There's usually a number of them that are coming down, and this can be really dangerous. If they happen to target your magic users, it wipes them out, and now you have nobody that does that radiant damage afterwards to take care of the shadows.
Yeah, and I think that that's important to realize too, is if you're trying to employ these in hordes, you're probably going to be wanting a party that is higher than level 18, most likely. It's really not one of those, or higher than level 17, because trying to get the number of these into a fight that would, represent a horde just seems like that would be an instantly deadly encounter for anybody involved.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's got to be one of those massive scale battles if you're doing that, where they're coming in waves and you have other creatures on the ground, and every now and then you have a Nidhoggr coming down as well to rejoin the battle after one has fallen.
Yeah. So I do think it's a nice mix of deadly and dangerous. I think that it has some interesting abilities like the Shade Rebirth that you mentioned. The resistances that it has, and then the variety of attacks that it has means that it can do a variety of different types of damage. It does piercing, bludgeoning, slashing. It even has cold damage on its sickle attack, and then its wail allows for psychic damage. So it's not just a one hit for everything where it's always the same type of damage. There's a good chance that something that it can do can bypass some damage resistances or reductions that members of the party might have.
I'm not sure if I have anything else on this. Like, I'm really interested in hearing folks' feedback on this monster, and if you're able to utilize it. People know Halloween's like my favorite holiday ever, and I love the month of October. So I've really enjoyed working with the community and putting together some monsters out of my own world that they can incorporate into their own campaigns. It's fun to see people picking these up and playing with them.
Yeah, and again, if you're looking for a copy of the stat block, just head over to the Patreon. It's completely free. All you have to do is just click on the link down in the description box, go over there, download the stat block, and you've got this, as well as the other two monsters that we've done for the month of October, which are the Bone Fairy and the Samarkle. So check them out. Let us know what you think. We're always excited to work on projects like this.
All right. Thank you guys for hanging out with John and I here again on Dungeon Brew. Hit the like and subscribe button. Leave us a comment. We'll talk to you again next time.
Dungeon Brew.